these inmates were asked to identify themselves, and these were all sex offenders, as atheists, church dropouts, church converts, people who converted and come into the church, or stayers, people who've grown up in a church, were there, still went, still believed. And in the end, the stayers had more convictions, more victims, and younger victims.
Oh my goodness.
And so we used to think that somehow we had some protection against this, but that may not be true. So, a little bit of an issue.
Are there
sure.
Ever religious issue? Are there more atheists, less atheists that commit these crimes than religious? What's on the percentage of atheists to
You know, I
religious?
don't think there's actually been a study that looked at that, but I think it's pretty mixed. I don't think religion plays a role in offending to the degree that we would like it to. A lot of the cases I work on are church cases. Yeah, so I don't know.
Have you found that possibly some people will stay in a church environment simply because it gives them more target?
Yes.
And
on the flip side, yes, I had a number of offenders who told me flat out that they offended in church because they figured that people in church are gullible and naive and it's easier to get away with it in a church community. Yeah. Because we're trusting and we give people the benefit of the doubt and we believe in forgiveness and prayer, and churches also have a vested interest. One of the questions we did get back to was, why the church didn't call the police on Patrick? Because they didn't want that kind of press and they didn't want to believe that they had somebody like that in their church. And I think families, very close communities, churches, schools, Boy Scout clubs, soccer clubs, whatever, that's a really hard thing to deal with when it's somebody in your group. So I think there's some protectiveness for the offender when they offend in a group. Okay, so we've kind of talked about some of these numbers, but one of them is out of 100 reports that go into Child Protective Services or law enforcement, only 30% will result in an arrest, and that's a national figure. And out of those arrests, only 30% of those will result in a conviction. So that feeds into how few we actually prosecute. We also have a topic that we call crossover. That's an important thing for us to know. Most of the child molesters that get caught have been offending girls, and that could just be an artifact of girls are taught more about protection and encouraged to tell and probably feel more comfortable telling, especially if the offender's a male as opposed to boys. But some offenders molest just boys, and some offenders molest boys and girls. And about half of the rapists molest kids, and people don't necessarily talk about that. Exposures also sometimes exposed to children. And we don't talk to kids about reporting if somebody's exposing themselves or masturbating in front of them, which also doesn't help kids tell, and that could be a trial to try to be able to figure out which kids you can offend by exposing to.
That tells you that it will work forever. I would question that.
Why a person develops a sexual interest in a child is one of the questions we don't really understand completely. And I think it's one of the most difficult areas in working with sexual offenders, because the idea of being sexually attracted to a 2 or a 3 or a 4-year-old is so foreign to most of us that we tend to do exactly what the offender does, which is to try to find some other explanation for it than that the person is turned on to children.
This is JL. My therapist is Steve Wolf. This is deviant fantasy. I'm getting aroused to the thought of putting my hand on his leg.
Jim is a pedophile. He's attracted only to children. He's confessed to molesting more than 30 victims over the past 20 years.
I'm with Michael. He's 9 years old. All he's wearing is shorts. I'm roughhousing with him, touching his smooth skin. It feels soft. I can smell his little boy body.
Jim's an interesting case. He presents probably one of the most robust patterns of sexual deviance that we are working with in community treatment. He's making some progress, which is not to say that if he left treatment today, that within about 3 or 4 weeks or a month or 6 months or a year, he wouldn't be back to the level he came in. But right now, while he's in treatment, he's under better control than he was.
Jim followed a pattern common to pedophiles. After an early sexual experience, for Jim when he was 12, There was a long dormant period until he reached his 20s. Then, while living communally in a house he built with friends, Jim began to molest their children.
In terms of my molesting kids, there were things that I could do that one would not do in a more traditional setting. It wasn't questioned very much that I would shower with the kids. It wasn't questioned very much that I would sleep with the kids, or even that I would sleep with them without my clothes on. What I thought at the time when I was molesting kids, when I was molesting Jerry, for example, I imagined that he was aroused the same as I was, that he liked it, that he viewed it as something of a defiant act.
Jerry was 5 years old at the time.
I felt of myself that I had been repressed sexually, and I thought it was, I thought sex was a good thing, and the more of it, the better.
Years after the house disbanded, Jim was arrested for a minor sex offense. His friends were shocked. Some were furious. Others urged him to get into therapy. The court sent him to Northwest, where he confessed to many victims, boys and girls.
I think a little girl's body and a little boy's body are real similar. They feel the same. The skin is the same. They smell the same. The only thing that's different is their genitals, which is not very important to me.
Okay, so what's wrong with that guy? Again, with the creepy thing. I am the queen of the creepy videos. Okay, so he clearly is aroused to children, and that 12-year-old experience was with an 8-year-old. He didn't have any other sexual activity of any kind until he ended up living in this commune thing where people were foolish enough to let him be naked with their kids sleeping in the shower, which wouldn't happen today probably, I mean, I hope. But we still let, you know, a soccer coach that we don't even know take our kid on camping trips. And there's other things we do that are similar, just not as blatant, but we still have better things. I mean, we still need to do better with regards to who we let be alone with our kids and how we talk to our kids and that kind of thing. But anything else bother or seem strange about him?
Well, something that was interesting, I thought, is that he just seemed a little more, he didn't really have the arrogance. He was almost more in tune with what was going on. That, I mean, he kind of got it.
Right. He's not that out there like those now guys who are like political activists. This guy's just a very quiet, secretive little pedophile.
Yeah.
I mean, he's clearly into kids, and so he's got the arousal and the attitudes. There's two things wrong with most of these guys. They're attracted to children, and they project their issues onto kids. You know, they think kids are into this just like they are, or they read children's behavior as a sexual cue. I can't tell you how many men I've had tell me that little girl was doing this with her skirt. She wanted me to see her underwear. No, she didn't. She was just wearing her skirt. But they read things into kids' behavior. Or they'll have a little boy on their lap, and because they're into little boys, the kid's on their lap sitting over their penis, they get an erection, and they think the kid knows and understands and wants, and you know, down the road it goes. And kids are like a blank slate at that point, especially when they're little kids, but they project their warped, distorted attitudes around sexual contact between adults and kids onto kids, whether they're there or not. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So why did it not matter to him if it was a boy or a girl?
Because he's aroused to children.
So is it not the intercourse that arouses him? It's just the children themselves?
Yes.
I mean, he was talking about the soft skin and stuff.
Right. Most sexual crimes against children involve fondling. But you can have a kid who gets fondled, or the kid that somebody has intercourse with, and the kid that got fondled can be more traumatized. The trauma from sex abuse comes from the grooming and the manipulation and the tricking kids into thinking that they're part of it and they're a partner. The other thing is that it can be more traumatic if people don't believe kids when they tell than the sex abuse. It can be more traumatic. How people react to the kid's disclosure can actually mess kids up worse than the sex abuse itself. One other thing, sideline here, is kids who are exposed to domestic violence, their parents beating on each other or one beating on the other, can be more damaging